Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs. And today on the program, I have someone that I very much look forward to chatting with, a highly sought after architect, both in Canada and abroad, internationally award-winning with more awards than I know how to rhyme off, and more recognition across both Canada and North America than, again, I can rhyme off. I have today with me Brian MacKay-Lyons of MacKay-Lyons Sweetapple Architects. Brian, thank you for joining.
Hi, Jonathan. Pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. So, unfortunately, is this scenario where I could not have Brian over for lunch. Normally, I have everybody over here to my house, but given the distance between us, I didn't know how that was going to work. So, we're doing this today via Zoom. And Brian, are you at the office or at home?
We have some satellite offices, and we built this one in Lunenburg. This is it's one of two UNESCO World Heritage towns in North America.
Okay.
One is Old Quebec City, and the other one is Old Town Lunenburg. So every once in a while, we do kind of foolhardily architect as developer.
Okay.
So what out of work architects do is amateur development. So we built a project right in the center of the old UNESCO World Heritage Site just to show you could do it.
Yep.
You know, no other reason, didn't need it, needed like a hole in the head, didn't have the money. And so that's where I am. It's a place called B2 Lofts.
Okay.
And it's two offices with 6 rental units above, right in the center on the waterfront in Lunenburg. So that allows me to live at my farm, which is 20 minutes from here.
Yep. And
drive into the local shire town, So I'm, maybe I'm being put out to pasture. We live on a sheep and cattle farm near Lunenburg.
Amazing. And the other offices you have?
We have the main offices in Halifax. There's a new development on the waterfront in Halifax called Queen's Mark, Marque.
Yep.
And there's a hotel there called the Muir Hotel. And it's a district. It's an unusual project for us. While my background is in urban design, my postgrad work at UCLA affects my view of what architecture is supposed to be doing. We don't often get those large projects to do, but in this case, we did. So our main office is in there because you kind of have to be your brand. You are what you eat.
Yes.
So having spent 10 years on this district in the center of the waterfront in Halifax, we thought, well, let's get out from under the mortgage of the last development we did in Halifax, where our office used to be, and work out of there. So that's our main office. We have a couple of offices in the US because about half our work is not in Canada or more.
Yeah. And
a lot of it's in the US. As crazy as the US is, there's a lot of great people there and a lot of very creative people. And, patrons. Patrons don't, it sounds like a rich word, patron. It's not always the case. Sometimes the best patrons don't have a lot of money, but they're intellectually patrons.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the US, I find people are more, their creativity has a higher value in people's minds generally in the United States. It's a commodity that they care about. They take more risks, more entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And in Canada, we have this low self-esteem. So, why hire someone from Nova Scotia?
Right.
Imported wine is always better, that whole Canadian thing. So as a result, we just go where the phone rings. So that's why we have a couple of offices in the U.S.
And whereabouts in the U.S.?
One in Denver.
Yep.
We do a lot of work in the Mountain West, which is about as far from the Maritimes as you can get in terms of landscape type. But the more you spend time there, the more you realize that issues are the same issues. If you're concerned with place in architecture, place as in spirit of place, genius loci, I always define place as landscape, climate, and material culture, what you got to work with wherever you were at.
Mm-hmm.
And historians call me the poet of place. So poet of place just has a little doctor bag, and it's full of your best practices, and you take your doctor bag with you wherever you go. So if we're building in the Ganges Delta, or we're building in Canberra, Australia, or on the Thames near London, or in a little village in Nova Scotia, it doesn't really matter because it's the discipline of thinking, this idea that you read the place and you mine it for content, which takes architecture out of a fashion business. You know, real content saves you from being a fashion dog.
It's
So yeah, so we got an office in Portland now. We're going to shift it to, I think, to Massamoka, Western Massachusetts, because we have a lot of work there in the Northeast. So we're going to move the West Coast office to the East Coast,
oh, interesting.
down in the U.S. Yeah, so satellite offices, you
And
know,
and is it are you hiring staff for those offices based out of the US? Or do you have
both.
okay.
And we have an internship, an international internship, and it's at our firm. It's called the Ghost Internship,
I saw that.
and that's an international thing. So it's great to be able to get people from different cultural backgrounds
Yeah.
into your office. And so, the ghosts for this year are starting in a week, and they live on our farm. So
Amazing.
it's a little bit like Taliesin. Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin, where it's 10% farm work and 90% architecture work.
Yeah.
And that, because I think of our agriculture and architecture very similarly as a cultivating discipline. And of course, the Ghost internship grew out of a thing we used to do at our farm, which is called the Ghost Lab. The Ghost Lab for 20 years was a design build off-road architecture school concerned with using your hand, thinking and making.
Yeah, this was
Uh,
started in the mid 90s and finished in like what 2011 or something, right? Is that right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And of course, the head and the hand have kind of gotten separated. Architecture used to be taught as a trade, through the apprenticeship system.
Yeah.
And I know Kenneth Frampton, you may not know that name. He's kind of the
Don't
most
mind to say I do.
he's the most important living architectural historian.
Okay.
And he said to me one time, he said, I think a school of architecture is a highly suspect way to learn to become an architect.
Okay.
Because the trade skill, like they built the Paris Opera House with 12 sheets of drawings. The architect's office was on site, and the tradespeople knew everything. It was an intact culture of apprenticeship, and that system we haven't really improved on. So anyway, and especially in these times, in these recent decades, when people don't even know where their food comes from, and they never pounded a nail before, they might go to the gym and get jacked up every day, but they can't pound a spike. You know,
I
uh,
do know. I've seen
it,
those people in gyms.
yeah,
And they're walking around with wide shoulders.
yeah.
Nothing
So
functional.
yeah, nothing functional. Yeah. So Ghost was a success partly because there was this yearning for the kind of head-hand connection.
Well, and I guess the concept also of to what you alluded to before, which was the 10% and the 90% that you want to find a way to be able to make the land work for you, right? Like that's ultimately what you're trying to do. So go live on the land and find out what it's going to be able to do for you, and you'll connect it to the architecture, and the architecture will connect to the land, right?
Yeah. People. It was also a kind of psychotherapy for arrogant young people because you get there and you realize you don't know how to make anything.
Yeah.
And there's somebody who's, a contractor or a craftsperson, and you realize how smart they are, and you should ask them lots of questions. It's like your grandparents, you should ask them a lot of questions. And so it teaches modesty, humility, to have to make stuff. And you realize engenders a respect for the trades, for the building industry. So anyway, that was a good experiment. And like all good experiments, you need to know when to stop doing it.
Yep.
So we capped it off with a Ghost 13 about 11 years ago. It was a great celebration, and onward to the next thing.
Yeah. Well, so I'm curious because we've talked a little bit here about how you've been able to influence and how the practice has been able to influence some of the young and upcoming architects in some ways there. I'm curious because I always want to try to humanize this. And so from your standpoint, at what age were you thinking to yourself, this is a pursuit I want to go after. I want to become an architect.
I was 4,
Wow. Okay. You were young.
and I was standing in the Roman Forum with my brother, reaching around a column in the Roman Forum, a Roman temple
Yeah.
column, and it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I can remember it like it was yesterday. Partly probably because my dad came from a working class background, and he didn't have the opportunity to go to college and do all that stuff. So he always said he would have loved to have been an architect.
Interesting.
And so I think that, and just so to answer that, you kind of got to go back a little bit into what it was like post-war. Like World War II, there were a lot of war brides. There was a lot of shuffling of the deck, right? Wars shuffle the deck.
Yeah.
So my dad was an RAF guy, came to Canada, married a local Acadian woman. That's what people did, you know. And so because they were going back and forth to Europe in convoys during the war, traveling seemed normal.
Yeah.
Before that, no one, like my mother lives in, a village where everybody's married their first cousins for 400 years. And so then you suddenly you're traveling around. So we got the benefit from our parents having learned to travel through the wartime experience. And then, but, lived in that little village of 400 people in a 400-year-old house my ancestor built in the middle of a Mi'kmaq community, an indigenous community. So super local. My family, the indigenous side of my family, my mom's family were probably there in that area for 12,000 years. And so, I really understood the landscape in a kind of epigenetics kind of way.
Yeah.
If you grow up, you know where to try. If you grow up on an Arcadia, which is a Mi'kmaq word for the marshlands, hence Acadian, Cajun, then you know where the good rabbit hunting is, you know where the good dark meat, muddy rabbit meat is, when the smelts are running, to dip them, when the kayaks are running, the Gasper are running.
Yeah.
And, after school, you go dip kayaks, you do all that stuff and you get to know the landscape real good. And it is kind of an epigenetic thing. I mean, we know that our genes, the benefit or the expression of our genes is influenced by experience over generations, right? If you're a native person and you starved every March, you get to see food and you eat too much, right? Because your body, your genetic code remembers 1,000 years of starving. So anyway, so that's very, very local, super local and super not local. So what that means is, it's all romantic, like, oh, Brian grew up in a little village and, all this stuff. Well, yes, but he was fortunate because in a merchant class family, you could travel post-war. And so, and it's like, Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home, but you only know that when you get out of town.
Of course. You only put a value to anything that you should value once you've lost it or it's gone.
Get outside of it. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I think I'm a very fortunate person. I know the first line, the opening line in Steve Martin's movie, The Jerk, he says, I was born a poor black child. Well, I wasn't, or I was, and I wasn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, Rome, 4 years old. And I never really lost that sense of what I was meant to do with my life.
You wanted to come back to find the new phone book after traveling.
Yeah, there you go. You saw that movie. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
The phone book is here.
I exist.
So when some of the research, I saw that you'd moved around with the family, right? You had lived in different places in the world.
Well,
is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you got to do the tour, and the smaller the place you're from, the more places you have to go see. So, and the sea culture, people tend to travel a lot. Yeah. So we lived in, my wife and I lived in Japan a little bit, China during the Cultural Revolution, California for 3 years, Southern California, Tuscany and Siena. I lived in Siena for a while. So those are the kind of pilgrimage places. You go to Tuscany to find out about the Renaissance. You go to Japan to understand the landscape tradition. You go to California to find out about Frank Gehry and all the kind of avant-garde things at the moment. And so that's what we did. And then just moved back home to have a family where our parents still lived. And,
it felt rooted.
Yeah. Maritimers are like homing pigeons.
Yeah. And you had to get back to the March famine.
Yeah. And wanted to make a contribution to the culture where the ancestors have been for thousands of years. And it was a bit of a sobering experience because, there's a thing with lobsters, how do you tell a Maine lobster from a Nova Scotia lobster?
Okay.
When the Nova Scotia lobster tries to climb out of the bucket, the other lobsters pull him back in. So I found it very difficult to have many opportunities here in Nova Scotia.
And you're talking, this is early in your career.
All the time. Now, last week.
Still now. Okay.
Yeah. So no problem doing an embassy in Australia. Real hard to do a daycare center in the town where you pay taxes. It just, there's a real thing, about the Maritimes. That's why Sarah McLachlan left and hates Halifax, just because all she got was that kind of treatment, pushback. Who do you think you are? You're just one of us. You can't be special. Special people are from other places. So,
can I
actually go where the work is. Yep.
I will say that I would also see it as that special people are the ones that are willing to stick it out to create a special place when there's a ton of pushback, because those are the people that are really influential in helping to change the cultural setting for the future generations of people that are there that want to stay there. So
yeah, there has to be a current in the stream. No current, the fish are floating upside down pretty quick.
Yeah,
healthy fish need a current to swim against.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe. I've been at it a long time, and I still feel that way. So that's a problem.
So at what stage did you take it upon yourself to say, like, I need to push hard against this stream. I'm going to start my practice. And where had you worked prior to that?
Well, in these other places, worked in Italy, worked in California.
Okay.
Worked in Edmonton, in the co-op program that Dalhousie has. Yeah, I worked for some really interesting people, really great mentors. You seek them out. You go where they are, out of curiosity. And I always had this thing about elders, like your grandparents. I used to sit at my grandfather's knee, and he was carving lobster plugs, like when they had wooden lobster plugs. And so you ask them a lot of questions, and they like it. They like being asked questions. And I had a learning disability, so I couldn't read or write. So I had to ask a lot of questions to learn anything. And I realized that really works. So I got to work with some great elders in the architecture world, probably, yeah, because I had to ask them a lot of questions to learn anything.
Would you
feel very fortunate that way.
Would you attest to anyone specifically that you felt really played a strong hand in developing you as an architect?
Oh, sure. I worked with Barton Myers, who for a long time had been in Canada. Worked with Charles Moore, who is kind of the father of participatory design, at least in North America, and worked with Giancarlo De Carlo in Italy, who was a Team 10 architect. Yeah, and they were really inspirational, and it continues afterward in terms of elders in the field. Like Glenn Murcutt is in Australia, has always been a big hero to me and lifetime friend, and I value that peer discourse a lot.
Yeah.
So he's Pritzker Prize winner, put Australian architecture on the map. All about the environment, how it should shape architecture, this kind of stuff. So
right.
Yeah.
And so
artists, I've known a lot of artists who have fine artists, because it's next door to us, right?
Of course.
So, working with, or getting to know people like Alex Colville or Richard Serra, people like that are also super inspirational in terms of their discipline, how they work. I remember Alex Colville would get up every morning in Rhoda and the dog and walk on the dikes that my ancestors built 400 years ago. And then he'll go back at 11 o'clock and start painting, put his smock on, so that kind of discipline.
Yeah, the regimented routine. Yeah.
Yeah, which is what Monet did when those water lilies, and what Bach did with his fugues. And that's how disciplined people operate. And I've always been, it's the tortoise and the hare thing. I've always been, Alex Colville said to me one time, creativity is 80% discipline. So I believe that. And that's not maybe all that. I was involved in teaching for a long time. I still am, I guess, but I was professor at Dalhousie for 37 years.
You taught my sister-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I was there anyway. Whether I taught her anything is another question.
No, you taught her. I was joking about it with her last week. So you start the practice, and what did it look? I'm curious because, like, you're young, you've got the ambition, you've got the drive. You talk about the intent in wanting to honor what the history is, but also at the same time push hard in a certain direction that the community may or may not be totally understanding of. So what did it look like for you early when you started up your practice?
It was pretty marginal for a long time.
Okay.
And of course, if you're a professor, the first day of class, you say, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
A third of the class start looking at the floor. And a year later, they're not going to be in school anymore because they're not willing to pay the price, right?
Yeah.
The 10,000 hour thing. And of course, that's just a drop in the bucket, 10,000 hours.
Of course it is. That's entry level.
Yeah,
You're no journeyman at 10,000 hours.
that's right.
And what did the projects look like early on? Were they
Oh, just every little thing, a little theater set design, a piece of
okay,
furniture, an interior, a paint job on the outside of a warehouse.
paint job?
Just, yeah, like literally just some graphic design. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, really, that I stuck it out. And we almost didn't stick it out. We were going to move back to California. Barton Myers offered me a interesting position there in his office in Los Angeles, and we are getting ready to go. And he talked me out of it. He said, "Oh, you got two choices. I'll either help you do what you're doing, trying to do now, or you come work with me." So anyway, we did stay, obviously, and if you live in a small place, you got to get out. So, and if you're getting kicked in the ribs every second day at home, you may as well go travel where people are nicer to you.
Yeah, it's
So I
just
got on the
a light
lecture
slap in the
circuit,
face.
get on the lecture circuit and stuff. So peer recognition, all that stuff is an antidote to the anger that comes from being frustrated from a business point of view at home. I had this anger theory for a long time, and I was giving a lecture in Norway, and a wonderful historian stopped me, and she said, "I'm calling bullshit." She said, "Anger might get you some ways down the road, but to look at the work, the work's about love, not anger, and anger doesn't explain it."
Yeah, I was explaining that to my children this morning.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I'd have a voice left to be able to talk to you today. I was, to that point, it's hard when you're dealing with things and there's a lot of pushback and resistance when you're trying to be calm and deal with it. So you get to a stage where you decide you're going to stay. And how many people at this point are working at the practice? Is it just you, or do you have other staff?
Oh no, there's people. I like people. I like working with people. If you don't, architecture is a social art. It's a team
Yeah.
sport, and I love the collaborative energy. When it's like I used to be a musician before, so music's like that. It's all about jamming together with people. So I've never wanted to be a sole practitioner, and so you hire your students,
Yeah.
rob the cradle a little bit. I worked with a classmate from UCLA who worked with me for 9 years, who's a builder first and then became an architect. And I learned that if you got a two-person practice, if you consider yourself an artist, the other person should be a craftsperson. There's a wonderful book called Artists, Craftsmen, and Technocrats, written by it's a management book. There's a lady's PhD thesis at McGill years and years ago. But the symbiotic relationship between art and craft, that's architecture where it's at. So I think that person, whose name's Bob Benz, he taught me a lot about how to think about making things. And after 50 years, he's still teaching me that. But yeah, needing help. What's that?
That's a good relationship.
Yeah, it taught me that that's essential.
Yeah.
In architecture. And he took part in a lot of those ghost projects too. People think, oh, O'Brien, did ghosts and he's a builder or architect. No, not. I would just pound nails because then I could keep the professional. I didn't get too close to the coal face.
Yes.
Stand back and let other people who really know how to build things teach people about that. Yeah. So I took a partner. His name is Talbot Sweetapple.
Yep.
Name's on the door.
Yep.
And he came from a little village in Newfoundland. Similar kind of story.
And how did you meet him?
He was a student of mine. With your students, you kind of know a bit about them. So it's not a total stab in the dark.
Well, and their level of interest and engagement in conversations and a willingness to learn, how they ask questions, what their work ethic is like. Like you start to understand a lot about them if they're the right people and they engage in it.
So Talbot's been there a long time. He's been there, depending on he was an owner since 2005. He started with me in the 90s. He was involved as a student, first-year student in the first Ghost project. So yeah, a lot of water under the bridge there. And then over the years, acquired two other shareholders, Shane Andrews, who was a student of Talbot's, see how it works, and Melanie, who really runs the practice. And Melanie's been there like 25, 26 years, and Shane's been there 12, 15 years. And, and they're partners, they're owners, bring different things, team sport.
Yeah, well, completely. And now what is the size of the practice? And have you found that there's a size that is too great to be able to manage the output of the work or to have control over a general team, or have you found that you've had to right size at different times? What's that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. We're about 25 people now.
Okay, including the
Uh,
offices.
yep.
Okay.
Not a big office. And I find when you get much beyond that, the culture changes.
Yeah,
No, I really respect people. Like, I have good friends like Tom Kundig, for one. He's got a 300-person office,
I know.
or Lake Flato, in San Antonio, Texas, who just got the American Institute of Architects gold medal this year. I respect them so much because Don Schmidt in Toronto, I mean, how does somebody run a practice like that and seem so relaxed about it all and
Right?
keep the quality going? I just find it amazing. I can't do that.
I don't understand it either. I look forward to having those conversations with them eventually.
Yeah, good.
I want to
Good.
understand that. How? You
Yeah,
know?
I don't get it. I think it is partly widening your wheelbase, learning to empower others
Yeah,
so others can feel agency
yeah,
is really important. And, founders like me are not always great at that, at creating those conditions for other people to thrive. But if you're a teacher at heart, then you are pretty good at it.
it's a
So, yeah,
hard thing to do. It's a
yeah, to relinquish. Yeah. I guess I've learned that, I should do just people want me to do what I like to do, what I can do best, which is not a lot. There's other people that are better at a whole lot of other parts of the practice than me. And it's just better to let other people do what they're good at, what they're better at, you know,
Yeah. Well, but it also takes
relax.
it takes time, even as you say that you went out there and you hired students. It takes time in the professional form to see them perform, to see what they're capable of doing once you start relinquishing some of that control and
Yeah,
and how they can set their feet and walk towards the run.
exactly.
Because
Exactly.
they fall down, and you got to be there to help support them to get them up and remind them that that scuff is not a big deal.
Yeah.
You can still
Yeah.
walk. So you've got a practice now that runs with 25 people, and you said from at the beginning that the practice is seeing work run across North America, but also overseas.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, and I actually I really tried over the course of my discussions with people to never ask the question, but I feel compelled to ask you the question. The
Uh,
question that I have is, I know that you've seen a lot of output from your office over the last 35, 40 years.
depends on how you count. I guess I graduated in 78, started my office the day I graduated, 1978. So that's a while,
Yeah.
closer to 50 years.
I didn't want to
But
say
when I
it
moved
because I
back and
don't
we
know how you.
started, 1985, I guess, was
Okay.
the current firm.
Yeah, so the official. So almost 40 years.
Yeah.
So in that time frame, would you say, and I'm again, I say this, I've not asked this question before. Is there a certain project that you feel you had at some stage over the last 40 years that really laid the foundation for all that you can achieve with your interest in land and material and the connectivity, achieving the client's request for what they were looking for? I know this is a really, really difficult question to answer. So if you can't suggest that there's one, that's okay.
Yeah. Well, usually when people ask what my favorite project is, I say the next one,
Yeah.
which is not a cheeky answer. It's actually true. And the day you stop feeling like that, it's time to hang up your spurs, right?
Yeah. Or put down the pen.
Yeah. So, but I would say when we moved back to Nova Scotia in 1983,
Yeah.
my wife and I wanted to reconnect with the landscape. So we found, okay, I came back to a teaching position at Dalhousie. So we started my practice and we wanted to live in a landscape that's like where I grew up, but closer to Halifax. So we found that landscape and that's where our farm is. And that farm has a name. It's called Showback, which is the name of the cliffs that overlook it. It's it's the end of a peninsula, the end of the world. And we built a lot of stuff. So it's the hat the rabbits come out of.
Okay.
It's the research lab. So the very first project in 1983 to 85, we won our first Governor General's Medal for, which is called House on the Nova Scotia Coast #1. And now we've ripped all that architecture junk off of it and made it into a back into the 1750 house that it was and gave it to our daughter and her husband, and now there's 3 grandkids in there, and it's next door to our farm. It's the next farm over from ours, and so on. So we built about 40 or 50 buildings in that little village. Like we're building about 6 right now. So the village architect mode of practice is the kind of seed of the whole practice in a whole bunch of ways. Intellectually, like we bought that little farm house on the Nova Scotia coast, #1. It was a typical barnyard. It had a barnyard. It had a barn and a garage and a chicken house and, that kind of stuff. And this old 1750 house. So, okay, courtyard, good idea. Nice idea. Microclimate making. Canada, lousy climate. Okay, this weekend, my family, all my grandkids and I, for my 70th birthday, were at Port Royal, the habitation built by Champlain in 1604, where my ancestors lived. But it's a courtyard. It's the courtyard. It's the defensive against climate, let's say. So I can say that all the building types in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, the fish shack, the English bar, the center core Cape House, these are the store, the schoolhouse. These are archetypes that are right there. And so I just studied that courtyard. And we're building a building in that courtyard today as we speak, which is a running shed for our daughter's horses. And, and the great thing about the homemade projects like that is that in the village architect or the village idiot, is that you don't overthink them. You need a place for the horses to get out of the rain, out of the sun.
Yeah.
So you just go do it.
Yeah.
You don't overthink it. And of course, those projects tend to have a essential quality about them, a timelessness, even, archetypal quality that the work of the practice is associated with. Mm-hmm. So if you went to our farm, the village there, you'd probably see half the projects you know about that we've done.
Okay.
So the practice kind of grew out of this village architect thing, just like Alex Cole. He only painted what he and his wife Rhoda walked by every morning.
Yeah.
And nobody in Nova Scotia bought the paintings, the usual story. So that's one story about the practice.
What about like one of the more challenging projects that you've had to take on over the years? Was it climate based? Is it geographical location based? Is it altitude?
Well, challenges are your friend, right?
Yeah, of course.
Frank Lloyd Wright said that. So, when we were building a lot in the mountains, Mountain West, in one place we're building, it has 60 to 100 feet of snowfall everywhere. And it's got the highest wind loads in the United States. And it's a seismic zone. And there's too much sun. It's a high desert, and you need sunglasses even to go to the toilet.
Yeah, I'm where you can see I'm like smiling and foaming at the mouth right now because I'm like, oh, it would be amazing to build this.
So we built a lot out
stuff
there.
Like that.
So you just take your, like it took me 20 years building in my own village to realize that the way to get the experience inside of the helmet that you're dwelling, a sense of the landscape, is to crop the landscape, to crop the sky out, to lower the window head height so that you see the ocean. And then you get to the top of the mountain, you get at 9,000 feet, 10,000 feet elevation, and you say, oh, it's the same thing. The tops of the mountains look great when you take the sky out because, eye level is the top of the mountains instead of the ocean there. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. So, tough climates are us, in a way. Like we have the highest weathering rate in North America in Nova Scotia, the most freeze-thaw cycles in a year.
Sorry, the most what was that?
Freeze-thaw cycles.
Freeze-thaw cycles, yes. Yes.
Something like 260 freeze-thaw cycles a year. So it makes you really aware of the weather.
Yeah.
And when you're living in your own village that you're making, you're kind of living with all your mistakes. And so everything becomes an essay on, natural ventilation or passive solar or framing views or, that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And do you feel, because one of the things that I've looked at and appreciated about a lot of what you've had is that you've had these amazing opportunities with work to be able to place these homes and residents, or I call them
beautiful
homes,
landscapes.
and beautiful landscapes. I feel like a challenge would be like, you look at like my house. I'm in a semi-detached house that's 25 feet wide on the lot, 125 feet long in the middle of the urban city. And there's limitations with what you can do with it.
Yeah, I think it's not quite that simple. I mean, everybody says, "Oh, you're so lucky. You got these great sites." Well, if you say architecture is about cultivation,
Yep.
then you're cultivating the site. You're building in a way that the Packhouse talk about the found potential of the site. You magnify it. So you take an ordinary site. There are no bad sites. So you're cultivating the site. Where our farm is, it took me 25 years just to clear all the trees. There wasn't a view.
Yeah, which means you've got a few decades worth of generations worth of firewood.
Yeah, we do. And then people say you're so lucky, you got this beautiful view. I say
Yeah.
you can leave now because it wasn't luck. 25 years of backbreaking work is not luck.
Yeah. And okay, and so tell me, because you did say before when I asked you was one of your favorite projects, you said the next one.
Yeah, well, the next one, the one we're working on right now, we're so jazzed about. And it is a story about failure. And, who's the guy, the football player there? It's not how hard they hit you, but how quick you get back up.
Yeah.
Devon Sanders. Uh, so this site where we're building is the site that Carly Simon, it's in Nova Scotia, and James Taylor used to own when Carly Simon wrote that song, You're So Vain, went to Nova Scotia to see, that site.
Yep.
And it's a sacred site for Indigenous people, which matters to me. And we built on that site for 25 years and designed things for it. Only built one thing and hated it. And I felt, okay, now I've ruined, my ancestors are going to come back,
Yeah.
and I've ruined scold me. So we found a client who would buy the property yet again, like 4 different clients I've had on that property. Anyway, so
You're going to get an
we
opportunity
built,
to improve what you failed at, or in your.
bulldoze it and start over, which, it's like the Fountainhead. That's right out of the Fountainhead, Alex, I mean, what's his name there? The guy in the Fountainhead, the proponent there, he didn't like something, he blew it up afterward, So not everything's a success.
Yeah.
Some things are mistakes and don't turn out no matter how much you believe they're going to be great, they don't always end up being great. So we're building this house now on that property. It's got so many stories to it. And it's a epic property. I mean, it's terrifying ocean, giant waves coming in, like just scary. And so we're working with this wonderful family and building this house there. And we've done a lot of projects that embrace landscape between buildings, like courtyards, microclimates, but sometimes over large distances, because the air between buildings is free. It's like the rests in music or the white space in painting. The space between matters a hell of a lot in terms of climate, for sure.
Yeah.
In terms of making the landscape structure legible, for sure. So this site, we have 3 buildings on 3 saltwater addresses that speak across the saltwater to one another across a kilometer of ocean and everyone. So we're building a drum on one headland, and it has a courtyard taken out of it, a round building with a square courtyard. The courtyard's lifted out, transported a kilometer away, and put on another headland, and they speak to one another. So when you're in the guest house, you're in the courtyard that used to be, you're in the courtyard, the negative of the courtyard, the positive of the courtyard. So it's high concept. So this time we're getting it right. So after a lot of false starts, we're really going to get this one right. And it's just so exciting.
Yeah.
And, it's an intellectual journey. We've gotten good at going on intellectual journeys with clients. People leave their taste at the door, and you get excited intellectually about what's possible, what could be possible. So that's where imagery, fashion is your enemy. De Carlo, the guy I worked with in Italy, he said, Brian, once you give an image, you can never take it back. It's like the price in the car showroom. It's the only thing anybody's going to remember. So you got to not do that. So abstraction is your friend, because you can talk about ideas as long as possible without the short circuit of an image. So yeah, so this is a project we're really excited about. So yeah, the latest thing, the next one.
And would you have thought 2 or 3 years ago? I'm assuming that's just before this opportunity would have come back to you. Would you
Yeah.
have thought 2 or 3 years ago that you'd have an opportunity to rectify what kind of sat with you for the time that it had? Like that's what's
Yeah,
so
it was on my mind. I was looking
yeah,
for a solution, and that's just the kind of way of saying it takes a lot of perseverance to get things right.
yeah,
It's and it's a body of work thing rather than an individual project thing because we've done several projects which capture large landscapes in between the buildings,
yeah.
and this one just does it on steroids. You know, I'm standing with my wife in the Orkney Islands in north of Scotland, standing next to a 2,500-year-old Iron Age Scottish broch, which is a stone drum tower thing on a headland, which is where they always built those things. And the client calls me up and he says, "Would you ever consider a round building?" I said, "Funny you should ask. I'm,
Standing in front of one.
standing in front of a 25-year-old one right now." So that's when you know
Inspired.
that's when you know you're in a good place with a client.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
and
the
I
more
mean,
local, the more universal. So that's a specific site, specific place in the world, and yet the whole world for the last thousands of years is still your thesaurus. It's still you can still mine everything in the world. You can mine it for inspiration, and hopefully a lot of local things.
mhm.
So the more local, the more not local.
Right. I'm gonna say I also think that it's a testament to what the practice has been able to achieve, to be able to have continuous opportunities on the same plot of land that the people was the client that's purchased this land now, are they a repeat client or is it a new client?
A new client,
So there you go.
but we do a lot of that repeat client stuff. We work with families for a lifetime. Like one client, they describe me as architect for life, every Christmas card. And we started working together 35 years ago. And now we're designing headstones for all the family in the graveyard.
Crazy. I mean, that's generational connections, which is pretty amazing. What I was alluding to previously was saying that outside of even working with people on a repetitious scale, you have the ability to also then acquire new clients and have new opportunities on old projects. It's a testament to the practice, right? Like that really means that you talked about already, you know, more than 25 is not the right amount, right? That you had other people that you've brought in that have helped fill gaps that you might not have been able to fulfill, right? So
Yeah.
so much of the path lends itself to what the future is going to hold, and we know this. But
Yeah, you are what you eat.
yeah, but the concept that you had it out there in your mind that like I've got to rectify this, and that person shows up to give you the canvas again.
It's almost, I don't get culty about things, but it's almost like there is such a thing as destiny, that there are things you're meant to be doing. And if you're true to your principles, will probably happen for you.
Yep.
But you can't be cynical. And that's where the anger thing comes in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anger
Call
doesn't get you
bullshit.
far. Yeah. I had to do recently a convocation address at Dalhousie or give me a fake degree, one of those ones. And
I saw that in
and
May. Well,
it was about optimism.
right.
We're in the optimism business.
Yeah.
And right now, there's a lot of cynicism, skepticism. It's a weird time. And, I told the students that if you want to just be cynical and negative, you will get to live in the world that you deserve, you know?
Yeah.
So optimism.
Yeah. Talk about it. Put it out there. Surround yourself with people that see that in the same way. Leave all that negative stuff behind, because then it will land you the client that says, yeah, I want to go redevelop that land, or I've got this incredible project in a region that you've never touched before, where you now go and figure it out with those new challenges. I was looking at the project at 9,000 feet, and
Yeah, we're working on our third thing with that client.
right. But the idea of getting into designing something like that in the location, and you talked about it before. You've got seismic activity, you've got wind, you've got snow loads, like the engineering that has to go into all of this, and the connectivity to the stakeholders, from a builder to trades to getting a concept like that literally off the ground.
Yeah, same thing with the builder. That builder, we've done half a dozen projects with them. Like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So we're fellow travelers, They're they're our bullpen or we're their bullpen or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Brian, I look at time and I'm like, I feel like we have to end this because we've been chatting for so long. So I'm gonna make a request that I haven't done before. So I'm gonna say, is it possible? Can we qualify this as part one?
Whatever works for you.
All right. I'll qualify it as part one because there's more that I want to talk about. There's lots more I want to talk about. And I know that you've got a lot to look after on your side. So I will say I'm humbled. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. I've only been in the business for 7 years. You definitely have more in this than I do, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk about, your life, the growth of the practice, the types of projects, scales of project, the important people that have impacted your life. Walden took on this risk of creating a podcast called Behind the Build, and we focus on construction, but we strongly believe in collaboration. And so, to your point that you just made about talking about the other builder, there's an art form to collaboration and communication, and we felt that
social art.
It is, and we really felt that if we were gonna call ourselves a collaborative construction management practice, we got to do it. We got to go talk to the people that allow us to do what we do and do it well. So I really am I'm humbled and thank you for taking the time.
Pleasure to talk to you. Nice to meet you and hope to talk some more.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.